The bitter sting of betrayal hit Margaret Miller like the crack of a whip when her husband raised his glass in mock salute, having just wagered her away in a game of high-stakes poker. The smoky saloon in Scottsbluff, Nebraska Territory, fell silent as all eyes turned to the table where her future hung in the balance of shuffled cards and whiskey-soaked promises. Nebraska Territory, 1858. Margaret's fingers dug into her palms as she stood behind her husband, Edwin Miller, watching him lose hand after hand in the crowded saloon. The smell of cheap whiskey and unwashed bodies permeated the air, making her stomach turn. Her blonde hair was neatly pinned back, her blue dress worn but clean, a stark contrast to the filth surrounding her. At 23, Margaret had already endured 5 years of marriage to a man who treated her with less consideration than his horse. "Ain't got nothing left to bet," Edwin slurred, his bloodshot eyes narrowing at the cards in his hand. The other men at the table chuckled, except for one. Across from Edwin sat a tall cowboy with dark hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything. His clothes were dusty from the trail but well maintained, and the gun at his hip looked well used but cared for. "Seems like you're done for the night then, Miller," the saloon owner said, reaching for the pot. Edwin's hand shot out, grabbing the man's wrist. "Wait, got one more thing." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. Edwin turned in his chair, his cruel smile directed at her. "My wife. I'm betting my wife." The saloon fell silent. Several men shifted uncomfortably, and a few muttered under their breath. "Edwin, please," Margaret whispered, mortification burning her cheeks. The tall cowboy's eyes narrowed. "A woman isn't property to be wagered," Edwin sneered. "She's my wife. Law says she's mine to do with as I please." The cowboy, whose name Margaret had heard was Adam Callahan, studied her face for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, a quiet resolve settling over his features. "Deal the cards," Edwin demanded. The dealer, looking uncomfortable, dealt the hand. Margaret couldn't breathe. Her entire future hung on this ridiculous game. She watched as Edwin's face lit up upon seeing his cards, confidence radiating from him. Adam studied his own cards, his expression unreadable. The tension in the room was palpable as bets were placed and cards exchanged. Finally, only Edwin and Adam remained in the hand. "Full house," Edwin declared triumphantly, laying down his cards. "Kings over tens." A murmur went through the crowd. It was indeed a strong hand. Edwin reached for the pot, his eyes gleaming with victory. "Hold on there," Adam said quietly. He looked at his cards one more time, then directly at Margaret. Their eyes met, and in that moment she saw something she hadn't seen in years: respect. Adam placed his cards face down on the table. "I fold." Edwin whooped with laughter, reaching for the money, but Adam wasn't finished. "On one condition," he continued, his voice cutting through Edwin's celebration. "The lady goes free." Edwin's laughter died. "What? You heard me. I'm folding. You win the pot, but she walks away a free woman." Adam's voice was calm but left no room for argument. "No man should own another person. She's my wife," Edwin sputtered. Adam stood slowly, his hand hovering near his gun. "You wagered her like property. By doing so, you forfeited any right to call her your wife." The saloon owner stepped forward. "He's right, Miller. Can't have it both ways." "You can't bet her then claim she ain't property to be won or lost." Edwin looked around the room, seeing nothing but cold stares. Even in the rough justice of the frontier, there were lines most men wouldn't cross. "Fine," he spat. "Take her. She ain't worth the trouble anyway." He grabbed the money and stormed out of the saloon. Margaret stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Adam approached her carefully, as one might approach a spooked horse. "Madam, I don't claim any right to you," he said quietly. "You're free to go wherever you please." I just couldn't stand by and watch that happen." Margaret stared at him, her mind whirling. "Where would I go? I have nothing. I have a small ranch outside of town. I could use a housekeeper, pay you fair wages, or I can arrange passage to wherever you'd like to go." His voice was gentle, with no hint of the expectation she was used to hearing from men. Margaret looked at the door where Edwin had disappeared. 5 years of fear and submission threatened to pull her back to him. But something in Adam's honest gaze gave her courage. "I'll take the housekeeper position," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan." "Adam," he corrected with a small smile. "And you are Margaret Miller," she replied, then hesitated. "Though I suppose I'm not sure who I am anymore." "Pleased to meet you, Margaret," Adam said, tipping his hat. "I think you'll find out exactly who you are, given the chance." For the first time in years, Margaret felt a flicker of hope. The journey to Adam's ranch was quiet. He led his horse, allowing Margaret to ride while he walked beside her. The prairie stretched around them, bathed in moonlight. After the noise and stench of the saloon, the clean night air was a blessing. "It's not much," Adam said as they approached a modest cabin with a small barn behind it. "But it's peaceful." Margaret dismounted, taking in the neat property. A vegetable garden grew to one side, and she could hear chickens softly clucking in their coop. "It's lovely," she said honestly. Adam showed her to a small but clean room. "This was my mother's room when she visited. You can stay here." Margaret's eyes widened. "Your mother's?" "I couldn't. She passed 2 years ago," Adam said quietly. "She'd be happy knowing the room was being used." Left alone, Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed. Just hours ago she had been Edwin's possession. Now she was. What free? The word felt foreign and frightening. She had nowhere else to go, no family to return to. Her parents had died of fever 3 years ago, and her only sister had moved to California with her husband. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams filled with Edwin's angry face and the sound of shuffling cards. Morning brought the smell of coffee. Margaret dressed quickly in her worn dress, the only one she owned, and followed the scent to the kitchen. Adam stood at the stove, frying bacon. "Good morning," he said. "Hope you slept well. Coffee's hot." Margaret poured herself a cup, surprised by the easy domesticity of the moment. "I should be cooking for you, not the other way around." Adam shrugged. "Been taking care of myself for years. Besides, you're not starting work until tomorrow. Today you rest." They ate in comfortable silence. Margaret couldn't remember the last time she'd shared a meal without Edwin's complaints or demands. "What happened to your ranch hands?" she asked, noticing how quiet the property was. "Don't have any permanent ones. I hire day laborers when needed for cattle drives or roundups. This place is small enough I can manage it mostly on my own." Adam sipped his coffee. "My pa dreamed of a big spread, but he died before he could expand. I've found I prefer the quiet." After breakfast, Adam showed her around the property, the chicken coop, the vegetable garden, the small herd of cattle grazing in a nearby pasture, and the 2 horses in the barn. "That one's yours while you're here," he said, nodding toward a gentle-looking mare. "Name's Daisy. She's getting on in years but still sure-footed." Margaret reached out hesitantly to stroke the mare's nose. "I haven't ridden much. Edwin didn't think it proper." Adam's expression darkened slightly at the mention of Edwin. "Well, out here it's necessary. I can teach you if you'd like." The rest of the day passed peacefully. Adam worked around the ranch while Margaret took inventory of the kitchen and pantry, making lists of what they needed. By evening, an easy routine had established itself between them. As days turned into weeks, Margaret found herself settling into life at the ranch. Adam was a fair employer, never raising his voice or making inappropriate demands. He taught her to ride Daisy properly, and soon she was accompanying him on short rides around the property. The day she received her first wages was momentous. Adam handed her the money without ceremony, but to Margaret it represented something profound. "First money I've ever earned," she said quietly, holding the coins in her palm. Adam looked startled. "Never," Margaret shook her head. "Went from my father's house to Edwin's. Never had the chance." That evening, Adam rode with her into town, where she purchased fabric to make herself a new dress. The shopkeeper, Mrs. Hanson, greeted her warmly. "Heard what happened at the saloon," the older woman said quietly as she measured the fabric. "Brave thing Mr. Callahan did," Margaret blushed. "Yes, it was." Mrs. Hanson leaned closer. "Edwin's been telling folks you ran off with Adam, nasty rumors, but most don't believe him. He's lost what little respect folks had for him after that card game." The news unsettled Margaret, but Adam's steady presence as they rode home calmed her fears. That night, as she worked on cutting patterns for her new dress, she found herself watching Adam as he read by the fire. His face in repose was handsome, with strong features softened by kind eyes. When he looked up and caught her gaze, Margaret quickly returned to her sewing, her cheeks warm. As summer progressed into fall, Margaret's duties expanded beyond housekeeping. She learned to collect eggs without spooking the hens, to milk the cow Adam purchased at auction, and even to help with simple ranch tasks. Her new dresses, one blue, one green, hung neatly in her room, symbols of her growing independence. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Adam broke their comfortable silence. "Planning on staying through winter?" Margaret's heart stuttered. "Are you asking me to leave?" "No," Adam said quickly. "Just wondering about your plans. You've earned enough to go elsewhere if you wanted." Margaret considered this. The thought of leaving brought a sharp pang she wasn't prepared for. "I have nowhere specific to go," she said carefully. "And I like it here." Adam nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Good. I've grown accustomed to your company." It was the closest either had come to acknowledging the subtle shift in their relationship. No longer merely employer and housekeeper, they had become something else, friends perhaps, or maybe something more, though neither dared name it. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the prairie in white. Margaret woke to find Adam already outside, clearing paths to the barn and chicken coop. She watched him through the window, admiring the strength in his movements. When had she started looking at him this way? That evening, sitting by the fire, Adam asked about her marriage to Edwin. "How did you end up with a man like that?" Margaret stared into the flames, considering how to answer. "My father arranged it. Edwin had prospects, or so we thought. He was charming when he wanted to be." She sighed. "By the time I realized who he truly was, it was too late. He hurt you." "It wasn't a question." Margaret nodded slightly. "Not often, only when drinking. He preferred other methods of control." Adam's hands clenched into fists. "If I ever see him again, please," Margaret interrupted. "I don't want to think about him anymore. That life feels like a bad dream now." Adam relaxed slightly, reaching for his guitar. "My mother used to say music heals what medicine can't touch." As he played, soft melodies filling the cabin, Margaret felt the last vestiges of Edwin's control slipping away. Here, in this moment, she was truly free. Winter settled in earnest, bringing with it long evenings by the fire. Adam taught Margaret to play chess, and she taught him to bake bread the way her grandmother had shown her. They talked of books and childhood memories, carefully avoiding the painful years of her marriage. Christmas approached, bringing a festive spirit despite their isolation. Margaret secretly sewed Adam a new shirt, using fabric she'd purchased with her wages. Adam disappeared into town one day, returning with mysterious parcels he hid in the barn on Christmas Eve. They exchanged gifts by firelight. Adam's eyes widened with pleasure at the shirt, his fingers tracing the careful stitching. "This is fine work," he said. "Thank you." Margaret blushed at his praise. "Your turn." Adam handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside, Margaret found a beautiful leather-bound journal and a fountain pen. "You mentioned wanting to write down your thoughts," Adam explained. "Thought this might help." Tears pricked Margaret's eyes. The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. "It's perfect." Their eyes met over the gifts, and something electric passed between them. Adam leaned forward slightly, then caught himself. "There's something else," he said, clearing his throat. From behind his chair, he produced a small evergreen branch adorned with red berries. Not much of a Christmas tree, but Margaret laughed, delighted. "It's wonderful." Together they placed the branch in a jar on the mantel, their hands brushing as they arranged it. The touch sent warmth cascading through Margaret. That night, as snow fell gently outside, Margaret wrote her first entry in the journal. "I came here with nothing but the clothes on my back and a heart full of fear. Now I find myself rich in ways I never imagined possible. I am becoming someone new, someone stronger, braver. And I am falling in love with a man who sees me, truly sees me." The admission, even privately to herself, was both frightening and liberating. January brought bitter cold and a blizzard that kept them housebound for 3 days. They passed the time with books, chess, and stories. Margaret learned that Adam had fought briefly in the Mexican-American War, before returning to take over the ranch when his father fell ill. Adam discovered Margaret's talent for storytelling, entranced as she recounted tales her Irish grandmother had shared. By February, their daily routine had taken on a comfortable familiarity. They worked side by side during daylight hours, their movements in sync like dancers who had practiced together for years. In the evenings, they shared the domestic tasks of cooking and cleaning up, often brushing against each other in the small kitchen. Each accidental touch sent Margaret's heart racing. She found herself watching Adam when he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved confidently over tasks, the curve of his smile when something amused him, the faraway look in his eyes when he gazed out at the prairie. One evening, as Margaret mended a tear in one of Adam's shirts, she noticed him watching her intently. "Is something wrong?" she asked. Adam shook his head. "Just thinking how different this place feels with you here." "Better." Margaret smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. "I feel the same." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then Adam stood abruptly. "Getting late. Good night, Margaret." As he disappeared into his room, Margaret sighed. Something was holding him back. Perhaps it was propriety or concern for her reputation. Or maybe he simply didn't feel what she was feeling. The next morning brought unexpected news. Adam returned from checking fence lines with a grim expression. "Rider coming," he said. "It's Sheriff Davis from town." Margaret's heart raced with fear. Had Edwin sent the law after her? The sheriff arrived in a cloud of cold air and stamping horses. After the customary greetings, he delivered his news. "Edwin Miller's been making trouble again," he said, accepting the coffee Margaret offered. "Been telling anyone who'll listen that you stole his wife, Callahan." Adam's jaw tightened. "Margaret is employed here legally. She's no one's property." The sheriff nodded. "I know that. Most folks know that. But Miller's been drinking heavy, making threats." He looked uncomfortable. "Thought you should know he's been seen with some rough characters from up north. Might be planning something." After the sheriff left, Margaret paced the cabin anxiously. "I should leave. I'm bringing danger to your door." "No," Adam said firmly. "This is your home now. I won't let Edwin drive you away." The possessive note in his voice sent a thrill through Margaret. "What if he comes here? Then I'll deal with him." Adam checked his rifle methodically. But I don't think he will. Men like Edwin are cowards at heart. Despite his reassurances, Margaret noticed Adam checking the property more frequently in the days that followed. He taught her how to use his spare revolver, patiently guiding her through loading and firing until she could hit a can consistently. "Hope you never need to use it," he said, "but better to know how." As winter began to loosen its grip, Margaret's thoughts turned increasingly to her future. She had money saved now, enough to start somewhere new if she chose. But the thought of leaving Adam brought a physical ache to her chest. One mild March day, as they worked together in the garden preparing the soil for spring planting, Adam broached the subject. "Spring's coming," he said, his eyes on the freshly turned earth. "You'll have choices to make." Margaret's hand stilled on her trowel. "What do you mean?" Adam didn't look at her. "You might want to move on, start fresh somewhere." His voice was carefully neutral. "You're a free woman. Can go anywhere you please now." Margaret studied his profile, trying to read what lay behind his words. "Is that what you want, for me to leave?" Now Adam did look at her, his expression intense. "No, that's the last thing I want." The trowel fell from Margaret's hands. "Then why say it?" "Because I need you to know you have a choice." Adam moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "I don't want you staying because you feel obligated or because you have nowhere else to go. I want—" He trailed off, seemingly unable to find the words. Margaret's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "What do you want, Adam?" she whispered. Instead of answering, Adam reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand cupped her cheek gently. Margaret leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "I want you to stay because you want to," he said finally, "because maybe you feel something of what I feel." Margaret opened her eyes to find him watching her with such vulnerability it took her breath away. "And what do you feel?" "Everything," Adam said simply. "I love you, Margaret. Have almost from the first day, but I needed you to find yourself before I could say it." The words washed over Margaret like warm rain, bringing life to parts of her she'd thought long dead. With trembling hands, she reached for him. "I love you too," she said, "and I want to stay. Not because I need to, but because I can't imagine being anywhere else." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, then deepening with months of unspoken longing. Margaret felt herself melting into him, her body remembering sensations she'd never truly experienced with Edwin. This was what desire was supposed to feel like, this breathless, joyful surrender. When they finally broke apart, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for a very long time." Margaret laughed softly. "Why did you wait so long?" "Wasn't sure you were ready. After what you'd been through with Edwin." He shook his head. "Didn't want to push you." The tenderness of his consideration brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you for giving me time, for seeing me as a person, not a possession." That evening they sat closer than usual by the fire, hands intertwined, discussing the future. Adam spoke of expanding the cattle herd, possibly hiring a permanent ranch hand. Margaret shared her dream of perhaps starting a small school for the children of nearby homesteaders. "Marry me," Adam said suddenly, turning to face her fully. "Not right away if you're not ready, but someday I want to build a life with you, Margaret." Margaret's breath caught. "Are you sure? I'm still legally married to Edwin. We can fix that." "There are grounds for divorce, abandonment, cruelty." Adam squeezed her hand. "It might take time, but we'll make it right." The prospect of facing Edwin again was frightening, but with Adam beside her, Margaret found her courage. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." The joy in Adam's eyes was all the confirmation she needed that she was making the right choice. Their newfound happiness was interrupted 3 days later by an unexpected visitor. Margaret was hanging laundry while Adam repaired a fence when the sound of approaching horses reached them. Adam immediately moved to Margaret's side, his hand on his gun. 3 riders appeared: Edwin Miller and 2 rough-looking men Margaret didn't recognize. "Well, ain't this domestic?" Edwin sneered, dismounting. "My wife playing house with the cowboy." Adam stepped forward, placing himself between Margaret and the men. "You need to leave, Miller, now." Edwin spat on the ground. "Not without what's mine. She's my wife, legally bound. I'm taking her back." "No," Margaret said, finding her voice. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Edwin's face twisted with rage. "You don't get a say, woman." "She does here," Adam said firmly. "This is her home now." Edwin nodded to his companions, who spread out slightly. 3 against 1, Callahan. Bad odds. Adam didn't flinch. "I only count 1 man here. The rest are just cowards hiding behind guns." One of Edwin's companions reached for his weapon, but Edwin held up his hand. "Not yet." His cold eyes fixed on Margaret. "Last chance. Come willingly or things get messy." Margaret moved to stand beside Adam, her hand finding his. "I'm filing for divorce, Edwin. It's over." Edwin's laugh was ugly. "No woman divorces me. You're mine till death do us part, remember." The threat in his words was unmistakable. Margaret felt Adam tense beside her. "I won't let you hurt her again," Adam said quietly. Edwin's hand moved toward his gun. "Then I'll just have to kill you first." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Edwin drew, but Adam was faster. A single shot rang out and Edwin staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. His companions, seeing their leader wounded, quickly drew their own weapons. Adam pushed Margaret behind him as bullets splintered the wood of the porch post beside them. Ducking behind a water barrel, Adam returned fire, hitting 1 man in the leg. Margaret ran for the house, emerging moments later with Adam's rifle. Taking shelter behind a stack of firewood, she aimed carefully at the 3rd man as he tried to circle around Adam. Her hands were steady as she squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, but it was enough to startle the man. Adam took advantage of the distraction, his bullet finding its mark. The man fell, wounded but alive. Edwin, clutching his bleeding shoulder, looked at his fallen companions and made a decision. He staggered to his horse, barely managing to mount. "This ain't over," he shouted, spurring his horse into a gallop. His companions followed as best they could, one helping the other onto his horse. When the dust settled, Margaret found herself shaking, the rifle heavy in her hands. Adam rushed to her side, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. Margaret shook her head. "No, I'm fine. You?" "Not a scratch." Adam gently took the rifle, setting it aside before pulling her into his arms. "You were brave." Margaret buried her face in his chest, letting the solid strength of him anchor her. "I was terrified." "Being brave isn't about not being scared," Adam said softly. "It's about doing what needs doing despite the fear." They stood locked together for a long moment before practical concerns intruded. "We need to tell the sheriff," Margaret said. "Edwin won't give up easily." Adam nodded grimly. "I know, but we'll face him together." The sheriff arrived the following day, taking their statements about the confrontation. His expression was grave as he listened. "Miller's been causing trouble all over the territory," he said. "Got thrown out of Cheyenne last month for starting a brawl. Been back in Scottsbluff stirring up resentment against anyone who stood against him in that card game." "Can you arrest him?" Margaret asked. The sheriff sighed. "For what happened here, yes. Attempted murder charges would stick, but we'd have to find him first." He looked at Margaret sympathetically. "As for the divorce, that's more complicated. You'd need to go before a judge, prove grounds." "Abandonment," Adam said firmly. He wagered her in a card game, publicly renounced his claim on her. "That would do it," the sheriff agreed. "But it'd mean traveling to Omaha, most likely. Territory courts are still getting established out here." After the sheriff left, Promising to send deputies to look for Edwin and his companions, Margaret and Adam discussed their options. "We could go to Omaha," Adam suggested. "Start the divorce proceedings." Margaret nodded slowly. "But what about the ranch? You can't leave it unattended for that long. We could ask the Hendersons to keep an eye on things. Jim owes me a favor after I helped with his barn raising last year." The decision made, they began preparations for the journey. It would take nearly 2 weeks to reach Omaha by wagon, longer if the spring rains made the trails muddy. As they worked, a new tension threaded between them. The shooting had made the danger from Edwin real in a way it hadn't been before. Each noise from outside, each distant rider, brought them both to alert watchfulness. The night before they were to leave for Omaha, Margaret found Adam on the porch, staring out into the darkness. "Can't sleep?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the night chill. Adam shook his head, thinking. Margaret moved to stand beside him. "About tomorrow, about Edwin." Adam's voice was tight with controlled anger, about what he might do. Margaret placed a hand on his arm. "We'll be careful. The sheriff knows to watch for him." Adam turned to face her, his expression serious. "I want you to know something, Margaret. Whatever happens, I'll protect you. I won't let him take you back." The intensity in his voice both comforted and concerned her. "I know that, but I don't want you risking your life for me." "That's not your choice to make," Adam said gently. "I love you. That means your safety matters more to me than my own." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "And your safety matters to me. We protect each other, Adam. That's what love means to me." Adam pulled her into his arms, his kiss fierce and tender all at once. When they broke apart, breathless, Margaret saw a new resolve in his eyes. "Marry me," he said. "Not someday. Now, before we leave for Omaha." Margaret blinked in surprise. "But I'm not divorced yet." In the eyes of God and honest people, Edwin forfeited his right to call you wife the moment he wagered you in that card game. Adam held her hands tightly. "We'll make it legal when the divorce is final, but I want to make vows to you now, before we face whatever's coming." The rightness of it resonated through Margaret. "Yes," she whispered. "Tonight, under a star-filled sky with only the prairie wind as witness, they exchanged simple vows." Adam slipped his mother's ring, a plain gold band he'd kept in a small box in his dresser, onto Margaret's finger. "I take you as my wife," he said solemnly, "to protect and cherish, to respect and honor in good times and hard times, until death parts us." Margaret, tears streaming down her face, repeated similar words. "I take you as my husband, to stand beside through all that comes, to love and honor, to respect and cherish, until death parts us." The kiss that sealed their vows felt like a beginning, fragile and powerful all at once. That night, they truly became husband and wife, their union tender and passionate. For Margaret, it was a revelation. What had been duty and sometimes pain with Edwin became joy and connection with Adam. In his arms, she discovered parts of herself she hadn't known existed. Dawn found them still entwined, reluctant to leave the warmth of their bed for the uncertainties of the journey ahead. But necessity drove them onward. By mid-morning, the wagon was packed, the animals secured, and the ranch entrusted to the Hendersons' care. As they pulled away from the cabin, Margaret looked back at the place that had become her sanctuary. "We'll be back," she said, as much to reassure herself as Adam. "Yes," he promised. "This is just the beginning of our story, not the end." The journey to Omaha was arduous but uneventful. They traveled cautiously, Adam constantly vigilant for signs of pursuit. Nights were spent in simple camps or occasionally at wayside inns, where they presented themselves as husband and wife without explanation. In Omaha, they found lodging near the courthouse and immediately sought legal counsel. The lawyer they engaged, Mr. Bennett, Listen to their story with professional interest. Abandonment is clear grounds for divorce, he confirmed. The fact that he publicly wagered you in a card game will work strongly in your favor. The judge will likely grant the petition. How long will it take? Adam asked. Mr. Bennett considered. With the evidence you've presented, perhaps a week to prepare the documents properly. Then we must get on the court docket. 2 weeks at the earliest for the hearing. Margaret's heart sank. That long? The law moves deliberately, Mrs. Miller, or do you prefer Mrs. Callahan? The lawyer's eyes twinkled slightly. Margaret blushed. Callahan, though I understand it's not legal yet. In time, Mr. Bennett assured her. Meanwhile, I suggest you both remain cautious. Your former husband sounds unpredictable. The warning proved prescient. 3 days into their stay in Omaha, as Margaret and Adam returned to their boarding house after dinner, they spotted a familiar figure watching from across the street. Edwin, his arm still in a sling from Adam's bullet, ducked into an alley when he realized he'd been seen. He followed us, Margaret whispered, fear gripping her heart. Adam's hand went to his gun. Let's get inside. We'll inform the local authorities. The Omaha sheriff was sympathetic but limited in what he could do. Unless he threatens you directly, my hands are tied, he explained, but I'll have my deputies keep an eye out. That night, Adam insisted on taking the chair by the window, his gun within easy reach. Get some sleep, he told Margaret. I'll watch. Margaret protested, but eventually exhaustion overcame her. She woke several times, finding Adam still vigilant, his silhouette outlined by moonlight. By morning, there was no further sign of Edwin, but the damage was done. Their sense of security was shattered. They moved through the next days with constant awareness, never relaxing fully. The legal proceedings progressed steadily. Mr. Bennett filed the necessary paperwork, and a court date was set for the following Tuesday. They gave their depositions, Margaret recounting Edwin's cruelty and abandonment with a steady voice that belied her inner turmoil. 3 days before the court hearing, disaster struck. Adam left to meet with Mr. Bennett while Margaret remained at the boarding house, working on correspondence with the Hendersons about the ranch. A knock at their room door startled her. Expecting the maid with fresh towels, Margaret opened the door without checking. Edwin pushed his way in, his good hand clamping over her mouth before she could scream. "Hello, wife," he snarled, shoving her backward into the room. "Miss me?" Margaret fought against his grip, her nails raking across his face. Edwin cursed, backhanding her with enough force to send her sprawling. "Still haven't learned your place," he spat, standing over her. "That's going to change. We're leaving." "No," Margaret said, tasting blood where her lip had split. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Edwin reached into his coat, producing a small revolver. "Yes, you are. Your cowboy took something from me. Now I'm taking something from him." Fear turned Margaret's blood to ice, but anger burned hotter. This man had controlled her through fear for too long. As Edwin reached down to grab her arm, Margaret kicked out hard, catching him in the knee. Edwin howled in pain, the gun wavering in his hand. Margaret lunged for the water pitcher on the nightstand, smashing it against Edwin's head with all her strength. The pitcher shattered, and Edwin staggered, blood streaming from a cut on his temple. Before he could recover, Margaret grabbed the gun from his loosened grip. Backing away, she aimed it at his chest with shaking hands. "Don't move," she ordered, her voice steadier than she felt. Edwin's eyes burned with hatred. "You wouldn't dare shoot me." "I would," Margaret said. "I'm not yours to control anymore. I never really was." For a tense moment, they faced each other across the room, Edwin bleeding and furious, Margaret determined despite her fear. Then footsteps sounded in the hallway and voices called out, alarmed by the commotion. Edwin glanced at the door, calculation in his eyes. With a final venomous look at Margaret, he bolted for the window, crashing through it onto the awning below. By the time Adam reached the boarding house, alerted by a messenger from the proprietor, Edwin had disappeared. Margaret sat in a chair, shaking while a doctor tended to her split lip. The room was in disarray, broken glass and water everywhere. Adam dropped to his knees beside her. "Margaret, I'm so sorry. I should have been here." Margaret shook her head. "No, don't blame yourself." She managed a small smile despite her injury. "I handled it." The pride in Adam's eyes warmed her. "Yes, you did." The local authorities organized a search for Edwin, but he seemed to have vanished from Omaha. The boarding house proprietor moved them to a more secure room, and Adam refused to leave Margaret's side again. The court date arrived with no further sign of Edwin. The judge, a stern-faced man named Harrington, listened to their testimony with careful attention. When Edwin failed to appear to contest the divorce, the judge seemed unsurprised. "Given the evidence presented and the respondent's failure to appear, I find grounds for divorce have been adequately established," he pronounced. "The petition is granted. Mrs. Miller is hereby divorced and may resume her maiden name if she wishes." Relief washed over Margaret in a dizzying wave. It was done. She was free outside the courthouse. Adam lifted her off her feet in a jubilant embrace, heedless of onlookers. "It's over," he said. "Truly over." Margaret laughed, joy bubbling through her. "Yes, now we can begin." They were married officially that same afternoon, with Mr. Bennett and his wife serving as witnesses. The simple ceremony in the judge's chambers felt like a formality in their hearts. They had been married since that night under the stars, but the legal recognition brought security neither had fully realized they needed. As they prepared to leave Omaha the following day, a final surprise awaited them. The sheriff arrived at their boarding house with unexpected news. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. "Edwin Miller was arrested last night trying to rob the First National Bank, shot a guard in the process. The guard will recover, but Miller's looking at serious prison time." The news brought complicated emotions. Relief that Edwin could no longer threaten them mixed with a strange sadness for the man he had become. "Thank you for telling us," Adam said, shaking the sheriff's hand. As they journeyed back to Scottsbluff, the spring prairie blooming around them, Margaret felt a weight lifting with each mile. The past was truly behind them now. "What are you thinking?" Adam asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Margaret smiled. "About the future, our future." Adam squeezed her hand. "Tell me what you see." "The ranch flourishing, perhaps some children running around eventually." She blushed slightly. "A school for the homesteaders' children like we talked about." "I like that vision," Adam said, his voice warm with promise. "Especially the children part." When they crested the final hill and saw the cabin in the distance, Margaret felt a surge of emotion. This was home, not just the physical place, but the life she and Adam were building together. Summer passed in a blur of work and happiness. They expanded the garden, added to the cattle herd, and began construction on a larger house adjacent to the cabin. Word spread through the territory about a capable ranch hand needed at the Callahan place, and by August, they had hired a steady young man named Thomas, who proved invaluable during the busy seasons. Margaret's dream of a school began to take shape when 3 homesteading families approached her about teaching their children. By fall, the cabin had been converted into a simple schoolhouse 3 days a week, with Margaret instructing 8 children of various ages in reading, writing, and arithmetic. The anniversary of the poker game that had changed her life arrived with little fanfare. Adam presented Margaret with a small wooden carving of a horse he'd been working on in secret. "Not exactly jewelry," he said almost shyly, "but I thought it might remind you of how far you've come, How strong you are." Margaret traced the smooth lines of the carving, touched by the hours of careful work it represented. "It's perfect." That night, as they lay together in the new house that still smelled of fresh-cut lumber, Margaret shared news she'd been saving for a special moment. "I'm with child," she whispered, guiding Adam's hand to her still flat stomach. "Due in spring." Adam's face transformed with wonder, joy illuminating his features. "A baby, you're certain?" Margaret nodded, her own happiness reflecting his. "Dr. Sanders confirmed it yesterday when I was in town." Adam gathered her close, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you so much, Margaret Callahan." As winter settled over the prairie once more, Margaret's body changed, rounding with the new life growing within. The school continued through the cold months, the children arriving bundled against the chill, eager for knowledge and the warm cookies Margaret often baked as rewards for good work. Word reached them occasionally about Edwin. He had been sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison, his crimes compounded by his unrepentant attitude. Margaret said a quiet prayer for the man who had once been her husband, hoping he might find some measure of peace. The baby arrived on a bright April morning, a healthy boy with Adam's blue eyes and a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. They named him James, after Adam's father. "He's perfect," Adam said, cradling his son with careful hands that had built fences and branded cattle, but now trembled with the precious weight of new life. Margaret watched them, her heart so full she thought it might burst. From property to be wagered, to free woman, to wife and mother, her journey had been remarkable. Yet it was not the destination that mattered most, but the man beside her who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. As spring bloomed across the prairie, bringing new growth to the land, the Callahan ranch flourished. Margaret recovered her strength quickly, soon balancing motherhood with her teaching duties. Adam expanded the cattle operation, hiring 2 more hands to manage the growing herd. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, baby James sleeping peacefully in Margaret's arms, Adam spoke of the future. "I was thinking we might build a proper schoolhouse next year," he said. "The number of families settling nearby is growing. Your little school might need more space soon." Margaret smiled, touched by his support for her passion. "I'd like that, and perhaps someday James will have siblings to join the class." Adam's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I'd like that very much." As darkness settled over the prairie, stars appearing one by one in the vast sky, Margaret reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. A card game, a gamble, a man's cruel impulse to wager away what he saw as his property, all leading to this moment of perfect contentment. "What are you thinking about?" Adam asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how sometimes what seems like the worst moment of your life can lead to the best," Margaret replied. "If Edwin hadn't wagered me that night." Adam nodded, understanding. "And if I hadn't folded?" "Why did you?" Margaret had never asked before. "You could have won that hand, taken the money and me both." Adam was quiet for a moment. "Because no person should own another. Because I saw something in your eyes that night, strength, dignity, despite everything. I wanted to see who you would become when you were free to choose your own path." Margaret leaned her head against his shoulder, their son sleeping peacefully between them. "And who have I become?" Adam pressed a kiss to her hair. "Exactly who you were always meant to be. My partner, my love, the mother of my child. A woman who stands on her own strength but chooses to walk beside me." As night deepened around them, the lights of their home glowing warm against the darkness, Margaret knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just freedom, but something far more precious. A love built on respect, partnership, and choice. From a desperate gamble in a smoke-filled saloon to this peaceful life on the prairie, her journey had come full circle. And as Adam took her hand, leading her inside to put their son to bed, Margaret knew their story was still just beginning. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together not as owner and possession, but as equals, bound by love freely given and joyfully received.